All right, good evening, everybody. All right, are you excited for a different chapter of Ecclesiastes? We're in chapter 3. If you want to go ahead and turn there in your Bibles. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, continuing our study on this interesting book. I do want to be upfront with you that this, whenever I was studying, I was really wrestling earlier this week on how far do we actually go in this chapter. Sometimes that the breaks in the in your Bible with the headers, that doesn't always follow the flow and train of thought. And so I was back and forth. Do you go all the way to verse 15? Do you stop at verse 8? And I just was, as I got studying and thinking about this, with the time frame and the time slot that we have, it would be too much to cover all those 15 verses with all the substance in them. And so, as the preacher in me says, just break it up. So we're going to take these first 8 verses and kind of flesh that out a little bit more tonight, and then we're going to pick up the second half of this section, verse 9 through 15. And so this week's study today, it's going to be a little more theological, maybe a little more, maybe a mindset approach, and then next week is going to probably, I'm thinking it's going to be a little more practical. We're going to wrestle with things that Solomon's wrestling with, and so just hang with me on that. We've been going through just a little bit, quick review on one slide. We've been going through, and at least in the first couple of chapters 1 and 2 of Ecclesiastes, Solomon has been, it's like he's been standing at the edge of the amusement park, and we've kind of used that as an illustration. We've been trying different things, going through different tests in life, and is this going to bring me fulfillment, or is this going to bring me satisfaction? And at the front entrance, before we even start, Solomon's given us the thesis or the answer up front. Nothing is satisfying. It gives you this nice feeling, this woozy feeling as you go on this ride, or as you eat the funnel cake, or as you go and buy this thing in the gift shop. But at the end of the day, it's all hevel. It's just grabbing after smoke or grabbing after a bubble that pops, right? And so you just kind of move forward. And that's really Solomon's thing. And so today, though, we kind of transition into a different section of the book where Solomon is looking at a time for everything. Now, as we think about time, we think about seasons. I want to ask you a couple discussion questions, and then we're going to move into it. In what ways do you find the seasons of your life comforting or maybe even frustrating? How do you feel about the seasons of your life?
They come and go.
Joe said they come and go. I don't know if that answers my question, but yeah, you're right. They do.
Good and bad in each season.
Okay, good and bad in each season.
Like, now that I'm older, I can see that being young wasn't always so great, And then, but now that I'm older, things in my body are breaking down, and being young is pretty great.
Okay, so there's kind of some give and take to that.
I remember the seasons when I had kids is like each season of their life.
Yeah.
Each one was more special than the other had been. I thought, it can't be any better than this. And then, how sweet they are now. Or, it changed and it was different.
Are you saying you have favorites?
She didn't have boys.
Oh.
But I did have grandson, and now I've got several. But it was different with each one, but each
Yeah.
time it seemed to get better.
Okay, so those of you parents who have multiple kids, I can just imagine, not through personal experience, but through observing and seeing. I'm sure each kid, it adds a different environment, changes the environment. It's a neat little thing, neat little season.
Just when you think you kind of adapted and figured everything out, or comfortable, something changes, and then it's just...
And I can't figure out why. Why is that, Brian? Brian brought out the point of, it feels like every time you're in a season or transition, so like let's just say you're, let's use the kid illustration. It's like you've mastered parenting with one kid, but all of a sudden here comes another one, and now it just adds to your plate, right? Or maybe young adult life, you just now get used to college, and now you get more work on you, or something like that. It's like you seem to master it or get it down, and then all of a sudden here comes something else, and it changes it. Now you're in a different season of life. I don't understand why that happens, but that is often been our experience.
They leave home and they come back.
Leave home, they come back. I'm not going to get into that one. So is that frustrating or comforting? Okay. Yeah. Sorry, Nora. It's worse when they don't come back. I don't know. What about the season of life that you're in right now? It hurts? We're glad you're here, Joe. Who said that? Oh, busy? Absolutely. Yeah, run around with different sports events and then work on top of that and navigating everything you do at work. Yeah.
Also, you have time to reflect on seasons past and think, I wonder what I could have done differently that would have made a better impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes we have to be careful with that too, because I tend to be a reflective person. I enjoy looking back at what life was like before and looking at what it's like now, and there are times where you can be reflective. Sometimes, though, if you turn it into I didn't do enough, or I never did enough, or I could have done this, but you don't appreciate it for what it is, So, but yeah, absolutely. Do you feel like time is moving too fast or too slow, and why?
Yeah.
Too fast? Miss Barber, you say too fast?
It seemed like it's January and then it's December again.
Yeah. Put your head down in January and you look up and it's December. Yeah.
I think time does go faster as you get older. It doesn't seem like.
Did y'all ever, go ahead.
It seems like the more routine I have, the faster things come around.
Uh-huh.
As you get older, you get into, you gotta do something every month or every week, and it's like it's here all the time.
Mm-hmm. Routine, I think of responsibility. Think about the third grader. I remember sitting at third or fourth grade, or just a kid in grade school where, at that time we did not switch classes. And so you didn't do that till, whenever I was growing up, you didn't do that till you were in fifth grade. Did y'all have the similar experience until you get seventh grade? Okay. Maybe I was in a bigger school district, so maybe that's what it was, but sorry. But we started switching classes in fifth grade and then moved on up, and it seemed like the day went by quicker when your day was broken up into different little sections. Also, but you think about this too, a kid in elementary school is sitting there in the same classroom for most of the day, and they're just, like, I was watching the clock all the time. When is it going to be 3:15? When are we going to be able to be dismissed? When are we going to be able to go outside and play? Like, I wanted to do that. Good student, but I still wanted to go out. I was restless. And so from my third grade perspective, I wanted time to move so quickly. It took forever for Christmas to come around. And really, the whole hype on Christmas is the anticipation leading up to it. The day is like, bleh. I mean, after Christmas morning, it's like, bleh, But anyways, there's a time in your life when things seem to move so slowly, and then as you get older, you have more responsibilities, you have more things going on, you're signed up for more things, and it seems like the older you get, what is it? The faster it goes. Interesting. All right, we're in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, just for the first 8 verses. And again, just to reiterate, I believe the section really can go to verse 15, but we're going to break it up into halves, ironically for the sake of time. We're going to spend tonight breaking this up and trying to do that. So anyways, tonight's reading, it's going to be a little more descriptive, it's going to be a little more observational, and it's going to be a little more theological in nature. So next week we'll probably get into the practical. But Ecclesiastes 3, starting in verse 1, Solomon says, "For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, and a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to cast away, a time to tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. This is the word of the Lord. Okay, so we're just going to kind of go through this. So I'm just going to lightly tap on kind of each verse, or a couple of verses, and we're just kind of look at it, and then we'll discuss some things towards the end a little bit here. Solomon kind of introduces us to his poetry, and most scholars would say that verses 2 through 8 is really a poem. It's kind of this poetic stanza. And so Solomon says, "For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven." Now notice in previous chapters, Solomon has said he's described it as life under the sun, right? So it's life under the sun. So you could think about that as anything that happens in life under the sun. But what Solomon says here is there's a season and a time for every matter under heaven. And so it's not just the secular worldview that he's considering here. He's actually considering this with God in mind and God in the picture. And so it's just interesting. It's just something to point out. It's a little asterisk you can think about under heaven, not just under the sun, where anybody else can be, pagans or God-fearers alike, but it's under heaven with God in the picture. And so he acknowledges this reality for all of us to consider. Everything in life, it operates on seasons and in time segments. Like Joe said, one season comes, another goes, and it comes, just one kind of follows in right after the other. It almost is kind of this cyclical thing. One season ends, one season goes. It's kind of the way you could probably picture it. Everything has a starting date and kind of an ending date. We just had the first day of fall start on the 22nd. Did anybody know that? Okay, I had to make sure that was correct, but
Somebody tell the weather, because I think you missed it.
yeah, I know, yeah. But everything has a starting date. You go pick up that milk, but it's going to have an expiration date, right? It just kind of comes and goes. And you go back to the grocery store and you get that milk and you get to the next farthest date out you can get, and you go and take it home and you drink it as much as you can and then pour out what you don't. We're just going to walk through this poem really quickly. I'm going to lightly tap on each of these, but before we do that, let me make some observations of this poem, verse 2 through 8. That's the poem. Solomon kind of hits on the question, when is the appropriate time for this event or this event or this event? This is the big question of wisdom. You think about wisdom. Wisdom is knowledge that is applied, properly applied. So I have information about maybe good places to invest my money in a 401k or whatever. I have good investment ideas or wisdom in that. I have this knowledge, but unless I actually put my money in the market, I'm not going to do anything with it. There's not going to be a return, right? You can know how to put a car back together, but if all your pieces are just sitting there in your garage, what good is that? You have knowledge, but you don't apply it, right? So wisdom is knowledge that is properly applied. Now, when is the best time to eat? When is the best time to fill in the blank? All those kind of things. Wisdom is knowledge that's properly applied. So when is it the proper time to do this thing or this thing? Now, this poem here, Solomon is not prescribing any solution. So when we get down to that thing where it says a time to kill and a time to heal, he's not telling you to go out and kill anybody. So when we get there, do not take it as if we're telling you to go out and do something wrong. Okay? But this is descriptive, it's not prescriptive. Solomon is describing things, he's observing things, but he's kind of telling us like it is. He's really not trying to find anything, I don't know. He's just not trying to really provide any practical application, although I will hit on relevant illustrations for us and we'll have some application at the end. But he's just kind of giving it as it is. Now, he also acknowledges that there are things in creation that are set in order, yet humans can ignore. And we're going to talk about the sovereignty of God with time, the mystery and the reality of time, but also the fact that we within time can still have our own free will. And so Solomon acknowledges we can ignore the natural creation order if we so choose, but we're going to bear the consequences of it. Like, for instance, the appropriate time to plant your crops is in spring, right? But you can choose to try to go out there and plant them in the winter. I don't really think that's a wise idea, but you can do it. It's probably not going to work out for you. Or you can just avoid not to plant at all and you won't have anything come harvest, right? Things are set in order with the way that they are, yet we can choose to ignore them. The sun rises at a certain time, but that doesn't mean you get up at that time, right? You miss out on that sunset or sunrise. And I want you to notice too in this poem, there's 14 pairs of items. This might feel very similar to you if you're familiar with the New Testament. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he has the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed those who are meek, for they'll inherit the earth, and all those things. He kind of goes through these things. It's kind of like that a little bit. But if you notice in this poem, there's 14 pairs of items. So there's 28 things that he mentions here that seem kind of favorable and unfavorable, or positive and negative. And those of you who are more accountant-minded, at the very end, if you notice, there's something kind of favorable, something not so favorable. There's some things that are, you could say, positive or negative, or something I want, something I don't want, a beginning and an end. At the very end of it, he takes us down to a zero balance. Like it's all even out. Just an interesting poetic thing to notice. All right, so going through this real quick. Solomon gets poetic here. He says there's a time to be born and there's a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. Now you think about being born and dying, okay? This is probably something we meditate on here and there. Time to be born and a time to die. You and I cannot control those things. On just a natural timetable, you and I mean, sure, you actually did not ask to be here. Your parents made a decision for you to end up being here, right? And even in their decision, once that process of conception started, the whole pregnancy thing you just kind of manage it and navigate it. But you can't control when the baby comes, right? Ladies, am I wrong? Okay, but in Solomon's time, okay. I mean, but that baby's going to come when, I know you can schedule C-sections and things like that, but ultimately, but you still have to wait a certain point before you can do that, right? So this whole process is being done and you're just kind of the vessel for it, right? And then dying, understandably, sometimes we find ourselves in fatal accidents or things, or there's ripple effects of a fallen world that impact us, and sometimes that ends up with our lives being taken. But ultimately, if everything is normal and fine, there's a time to be born and there's a time to die, and we do not know when that's coming. And so there's a time to be in the cradle, at 10 months. But if you're still laying in a cradle at 10 years old or 20 years old, there's something wrong, right? Then you go to the agricultural part. There's a time to plant. There's a time to pluck up what is planted. Kind of like with agriculture, the plants can't control when they're planted, and they can't control when they're uprooted. They just simply live within that time frame. Those are just kind of interesting. But then verse 3, Solomon says there's a time to kill and there's a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up. Now remember, this is descriptive. It's not prescriptive. Do not go and kill anybody. If anything, kill your sin. But kill here can kind of take on more maybe appropriate terms or appropriate forms, like there's a time to defend yourself, like with self-defense. An intruder comes in. I think there's very good reason for you to defend your family. Absolutely. Yeah, in war, just war, you could say, but I don't know. I don't know on just people, but just everything I read was referring to making sure, hey, we're not advocating for murder here. If you think, though, in an agricultural setting, if you have an animal that's suffering, how many of you have had an animal that kind of suffers and they just, the longer that they live, the more that they end up suffering or struggling? Well, at some point you may have to make that call. Do I put them down or do I let them stay in this condition? And maybe you have them put down in a painless way. And I know that's always unfortunate to do, but sometimes there is a time to take on that or time to heal. So I think maybe in an agricultural setting, probably. There's a time to break down and there's a time to build up. There's a time to tear down old things of the past that are dangerous to us or that are falling apart. I think about those really, really old barns that are almost kind of like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, but in like southeast Arkansas. Y'all know what I'm talking about? I mean, you walk over them, you think they're about to fall on you. You could not go in there or house any livestock or anything in there. I mean, they're just about to lean over and fall, and you're about to get splinters and tetanus all over you. Like that's what I'm thinking about. There's sometimes a need to tear things down, but there's also, and you could even take this and apply this to maybe the unhealthy routines or patterns or cycles in your family. We all inherit some type of habit, some type of routine from our generations before us. You really learn how to emulate, your parents or your grandparents. And so now there's probably some things that you do in your life because that's how you were raised, right? Some of those are good and healthy and productive and even godly. Some of those are not. And we're probably pretty aware of the things that are not. Maybe this is a time to tear down and to break down those generational cycles and to implement new ones and to build up new ones. So there's a time to tear and break things down, but there's also a time to build things up. Like the kingdom of God. We need you involved. We want you involved. Be involved anywhere you can. Build up the kingdom of God. And college students, I think about you as well, and just young adults in general, trying to get yourself established and get yourself a degree in this world, and then trying to get yourself established as a young adult can take some time and process and effort. But you're not building yourself up or getting yourself established just to build yourself up. You're getting yourself established to be a blessing. And so there's a time to allow yourself to build up to be a blessing. There's also a time to break down some things. Solomon then he says in verse 4, there's a time to weep, there's a time to laugh, there's a time to mourn, and a time to dance. Now I'm going to take weeping and mourning together and laughing and dancing. But you look at this. This is our emotions now. We've moved from things that we do with our hands to now the way that we feel, these emotions that we carry around with us in life. There's a time to laugh and there's a time to dance. When you're at that wedding and there's time to celebrate and rejoice with the newlyweds, that's not the time that you speak up and say, oh, wait till you're married 10 years. Oh, no. You start kind of doing marriage counseling right there. That's not the time to say that. It's not the time to talk about your marriage problems. It's time to celebrate them, right? And the fact that you laughed tells me there's something valid about that. When the newlyweds, when they announce later on in their marriage that they're pregnant, you rejoice with them at their gender reveal party. Oh, it's a boy. Oh, it's a girl. Oh, you do all the things. There's a time to rejoice. There's a time to celebrate. Paul would say in Romans chapter 12, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Now that could be anything as frivolous as a gender reveal party, or it could be with someone sitting with someone in ashes like Job's friends did for a week and not open up their mouths. There's a time to laugh. There's a time to dance. Maybe when you're at your grandkid's birthday party and they've got these new toys and they've opened up these presents and they're experiencing a new set of years and they have things to look forward to and they're busy and they're doing things. Maybe there's a time to celebrate in that too. There's also, though, a time to weep and a time to mourn. When you're at the funeral of a cherished loved one, it would be really inappropriate to expect it all to be just laughs and giggles. Especially when you walk past your loved one for the last time as you say goodbye to them in the casket. There's a time to weep and there's a time to mourn, especially when you're sitting with your loved one in their final days. It is perfectly normal to weep and to mourn. There is a necessary time for us to grieve and to go through that process with very real emotions. And I'm afraid that, myself included, but I'm afraid most of us, myself included, we sometimes try to postpone our grieving, like we want to hinder our grieving. Oh, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to go through it. I'll just do whatever. Or we want to hurry it. And we know the 5 stages of grief, right? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I think those are right. We often want to get to the acceptance stage without going through all the other things. And so we either hinder that process or we try to hurry that process up, and that's just not, we've got to be willing to go through those stages as we can. And maybe it's not anything tragic. Maybe you just feel off, or maybe you just feel sad about something. There's a time to weep and there's a time to mourn about that too. Now in verse 5, moving forward, there's a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. This phrase is challenging in our modern English and modern world today. It most likely refers to ancient Israelite war practices, although I've read some sources that suggest this has something to do with sexual relations, but I'm not really going to go there tonight because I just don't want to go there tonight. So we're going to go with ancient war practices. But you think about this, if you're fighting somebody in a very agricultural based society, you could say kind of like Southeast Arkansas, if you're going to fight somebody or go to war against other opposing nations, what you're going to need to do, or one strategy that they would use, is they would take and gather these stones together, and then they would take them and they would throw them in the crops or the fields of their opposing nation, so that their crops could not grow as well, and so it would affect their economy and everything. Now, this takes a different spin, and I mean a real spin actually, on Jesus' statement in the parable of the soils, on the rocky soil, right? Because things can sprout up and grow, but it's not for a long term, right? And so that was an ancient war practice. I didn't know that until today, today and yesterday. So I thought that was interesting. There's a time to cast away stones. There's also a time to gather them together. There's a time to embrace, and there's a time to refrain from embracing. Think about your relationships or your friendships. If you've not seen a friend in a long time and you see them for the first time, I imagine you're going to go up there and at least shake their hand, maybe even hug them, right? Because you haven't seen them in a long time and it's been a close friendship that you've had. Maybe you embrace someone because they're having a tough day or they're going through something that you have recently struggled with. You can embrace them, and sometimes your embrace means more to them than any words that anyone else could say because you've been through that specific thing as well. But there's also times when it's necessary to sever relationships or set boundaries in relationships for the greater good. Now, Paul says in Romans 12 as well, he says, as far as it depends upon you, beloved, live at peace with all. No matter how hard you try to get along with people as a close friend, sometimes it just never ends peacefully. And sometimes you just cannot get along with them, and that's understandable. But Paul's calling there, as far as it depends on your end and my end, live at peace with everyone that you come into contact with. Sometimes, though, you may have to set a boundary. There's a time to refrain from embracing, a time to step back for a minute. Okay? He continues, verse 6, there's a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away. Whenever seek and lose. Whenever you lose something, you often are looking very hard all over to find it. Now, I got taught this at a very young age. I would look around, I'd lose something as I'm probably 5 or 6 years old. I'd lose something in the house, and then my grandma would say, well, Todd Ryan, just stop looking for it and you'll find it. Has that been your experience before? You stop looking for it and then you end up finding it within 5 minutes? I don't understand that. But there's a time to seek, there's a time to lose. I think about, y'all remember back in 2014, that Malaysian Airlines flight MH370? Y'all remember that story? They were flying from Malaysia to somewhere else over in the eastern part of the world, and in the middle of the night, all of a sudden the plane goes missing and they've not been able to find it ever since. I mean, there's been documentaries made about this whole thing. I encourage you to go watch it because it'd be intriguing. But there's this search and rescue going out, and they're trying to find and they're trying to make sense of why there's a plane part up over here in this part of the world, but then over here there's another one, and they're trying to make this story match, and there's search and rescue things going on continuously, just on a cyclical basis. They have to stop it at some point and then restart it. And I think they just recently ended one, and they're going to start another one up here soon, but they've been looking for them for over 10 years now. And they're still searching. They're still searching. There's a time to seek, but there's also a time, maybe we just need to give it up. I don't know. What happens when nothing comes back? That's kind of a cliffhanger. I really don't have an answer for you. There's a time to keep, and there's a time to cast away. There's a time, I think most commentators would say this has in reference to like our possessions, or the things that you may have in your home or in your storage or your closet. There's a necessary time to get a new wardrobe for your closet or to update your clothes, right? Back to school shopping, there's a time and place to be able to go and get different clothes for a new school year or just a new calendar year. But there's also a necessary time to donate your old clothes to Goodwill or have a garage sale, or there's a time to put all the decorations out in the house, but there's also a time to have spring cleaning, right? I mean, you see these things. And then he says to keep and to cast away. That was what we just did. Solomon says there's a time to tear and there's a time to sow. You think about, you probably see Jacob back in the Genesis narrative when Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers. This is Genesis 37. He's sold into slavery by his brothers. Jacob thinks that Joseph is dead because they have the coat of many colors, right? And it's full of blood. Well, what Jacob does is he tears his clothes because he's mourning and grieving because he thinks that his son has been killed. Now, at some point, there's a time to tear and there's a time to mourn, right? There's also a time to sew things together and put things back together in their proper place and move on and move forward. That's probably what that's referring to. There's a time to keep silent and a time to speak. Now, this is one that really applies to us. Sometimes it's necessary to stay silent about someone's maybe life choices. You don't want to entertain fools. You don't want to open your mouth and sound foolish either. So you might end up staying silent to them, but you might open up your mouth in prayer to God for that. But there's also a time to have a necessary conversation, to speak up and to correct something, to confront wrongdoing in a loving way. And I see where this could now be an extended 14 to 28 week series, just going through each one of these little things. We may not do that, but there's a time to keep silent. There's also a time to speak. I don't know what to do with James's thing on no man can tame the tongue, right? So then this last little bit, and then we're going to get into some discussion. Solomon gets poetic again, verse 8, there's a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. So it seems like we've moved from the personal aspect of a person's life. We've now moved to the international state or the national stage. You think about war and peace and loving and hating your neighbor. It's a reality, though, of human nature and human existence on the national stage we experience under the sun. Because as long as we've had different nations in this world, we've had conflict, there's been tension, there's been war, there's been peace, there's been enemies, there's been friends, there's been alliances made. You see this, kind of a natural part of human existence, and that's part of living in this world. Whether we agree with it or not, whether we support it or not, whether we fund it or not, there's a time for love and a time for hate, a time for defense and a time for peace. All right, not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, but let me ask you, how might this poem, just thinking about all the aspects of life that Solomon kind of reflected on, how might this change how you approach seasons of your life?
When you think about that very last verse we just did, a time for war and a time for peace, I don't often feel like that is just about physical war. Internally, we have a lot of war going on and we're struggling with something, or we're wanting to change, or something's happening. But once we get there, then we have peace with it. Just like Brian said, just when you get comfortable with something, then something changes and you move into a new season. And I think that's what he's, to me, is saying all throughout. You're going to go through different things, but you're also going to have these things, positive things that happen.
I appreciate you bringing that out because you can apply that probably to spiritual warfare too. And I thought about Ephesians 6 as you were saying that, put on the full armor of God. And we're all, and honestly, all of us, college age and up, we are facing and dealing with things. We're having internal battles in our head. You never know when you encounter somebody what someone is facing or dealing with. And so I've always kind of seen the motto, be kind no matter who you talk to, because you never know what that person is dealing with or facing. We all have our internal battles, and all of the narratives and the stories that we tell ourselves, whether they're true or not, they hold great power over us because we tell ourselves them over and over again. And so we're fighting something. Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, well, how does that change your approach then?
It comforts me to know that I'm not always going to stay in that spot.
Ooh, yeah,
Bad things
yeah.
are happening or something stressful is going on, that there is going to be something better down the road if I try to work toward because part of this too is you've got to do your part in this to make things better or to impact others.
Okay. So it gives you comfort, maybe a different perspective too, that this is not a forever thing necessarily. There's hope on the other side of it.
You know, there's been times I've wanted a job, I've interviewed and not received it, and then 4 or 5 months down the road, something happens, and you're like, ooh, I'm so glad I didn't get it, you know?
Yeah.
Because you just don't know, and God puts things in our life when we need it, even though that may not be what we want.
Always gives us what we need, not just what we want. Pam, you got something?
I think the whole point is telling us to take advantage of the time that God has given us.
Absolutely. If y'all didn't hear that, Pam said that she thinks that the whole point of the poem is to remind us to take advantage of the time that we have of every season of life. So that would mean that we don't rush any of it. We're not looking to get out of the current one immediately, or we're not going to rush it, whether we like it or not. We're going to take advantage of it, right? You have anything to add to that? Did I sum that up okay? Okay.
I remember when Brad, he came out and taught one night, and he talked about that. He knew his days were numbered, and he talked about that. If I had more time, and we need to take advantage of it.
Absolutely. Making the most of it while we have it. Does this hit you any differently? Anybody else?
Well, just recognizing that there are seasons helps you. Like if you're going through a bad season, well, it'll get better. If you're going through a good season, well, enjoy it because it will probably, the next season may be worse.
Yeah.
And not to just be pessimistic, but that's just the way seasons are.
You have some good months, and then all of a sudden you've got 3 different things that break around the house. It seems to always be in pairs of 3 or 4. I don't understand that, but now you got to figure that out, and then you got to deal with that, and it's just one. What do we say? It's always one thing after another.
Or these two shall pass.
Yeah. All right, Gandalf. Yeah, yeah, this will pass. Hopefully this changes some approach to your view of life. So I want to ask you, is everything that happens in life, though, since Solomon is acknowledging that there are seasons and God has set some of these things up, is everything that happens in life, though, always God's will? This is where we're kind of jumping into the theological part that we're kind of wrestle with.
It may not always be directly His will, but it may be a means to His will.
Okay. It may not be directly His will, but it can be a means to His will. Okay.
I just see him, starting here, he's talking about time. And God's not limited by time that we are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at least while we're here physically, but, I don't want to jump ahead, but he starts talking about eternity and all that, a few verses, but,
The reason that I even bring this up is because a number of people will in this passage go to this passage specifically, and they will say, see, the times and the seasons have been set up, and they will point and try to apply it to where man has no free will, can't escape the times or the seasons or whatever, and they call it specifically determinism. It comes to the same conclusion in the outcome that a lot of our friends and neighbors and other faith groups would say as biblical predestination, where God has kind of foreordained all of these things to happen, and there's really no free will. It's irresistible grace and things like that, and that just is not what you see in Scripture. Just going to be honest, you just don't see it in Scripture. I understand where you could, if you're raised in that, you believe it, but at the same time, the outcome of what that teaches is not accurate. So I would argue that not everything that happens in life is always just what God intended for it to happen. I mean, you look at Genesis 3. I mean, sin and death enter the world. It was allowed, there was an opening, but it doesn't mean that God intended for it to happen or willed it to happen. But yet, like Mandy said, there's a means in which it can be made into God's will, or God's will can be worked even through it. I want to just point you to a passage in Acts chapter 17. Paul says, now many of you know this passage with Paul. He's been separated in Acts 17 from his other missionaries. He's waiting for Silas and Timothy, I believe. You could correct me if I'm wrong on that. But they have been separated, and Paul finds himself in Athens, and now he's waiting for his compadres to come back to him or meet up again. And so he finds himself in Athens. He's walking down the streets, and he sees that there's more idols erected from the ground than there are people. And so he's running around, and he's trying to find it. And so he finds himself at the Areopagus, and he's giving this sermon. Okay, he stands up for him. Men of Athens, I perceive that you're very religious, and on and on and on. And he starts talking about the God, the unknown God that they have an idol for. They don't know who it is, though. So he starts teaching about Yahweh, preaching about God, Jehovah God. He made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. Now God, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, so you see this, Paul acknowledges God has set these time periods up in the boundaries of the dwelling place, but look at what man has here, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way towards Him and find Him. And you actually realize that He's not that far from each one of us. And so you see where God has provided this structural template here, but within that structural template, the seasons that are structured and set up, man's still responsible for finding God and seeking after Him, right? And so you see this kind of balance between divine sovereignty and free will, and just needing to acknowledge that. And so let me close with these two key concepts here. Again, this was more theological tonight. Next week we will more than likely get into more practical things. But it's important for us to acknowledge there is a time and there is a season for every matter under heaven. Now what you do in that season is up to you, right? God set it up, and God's will is going to always be accomplished, but will you be a part of it? One key concept is God is sovereign over time, and yet we still have options. And I appreciate you bringing that up, Brian, because God is not, we believe and understand that God is not limited to time. He's the creator of time. You find that in Genesis 1. He is the creator of time, but yet He's not bound by time. Now, the beautiful thing in the gospel is the fact that God exists outside of time in the eternal state, in the eternal realm, and yet Jesus, the God-man, steps down from the eternal heavens and walks this earth in real time and suffers and dies for us in real time, just like we would. And Jesus enters the casket just like we would. He rises from the dead and offers hope and life that is living and active. That's the beautiful part about this. So God is sovereign over time, and yet even in His sovereignty, even in His reign and His rule over this entire universe and this world, we still have options. And that's been debated for I don't know how many thousands of years. Augustine, hundreds or maybe even thousands of years before John Calvin came along and Martin Luther and put all this together. Is it all God or is it all man? Well, you could argue both are accurate side by side, intertwined and woven together. The beautiful thing, though, is that our God can be completely in charge, reigning and ruling, and yet we can still have options about whether or not we're going to fear Him and keep His commandments. And so you are still responsible for your choices. Because even in God's sovereignty and His providence, He gives you free will and the options to do so. That's why Solomon says, eat and drink and enjoy your toil. Like you have the option to do that or not. That is your free will. It's been given to you as a gift. Will you enjoy it? Will you make the most of it? I mean, at the very end of the book, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Will you do it? Right? God is sovereign. I can still have options. The second one, this was brought up earlier, and I appreciate y'all bringing this up. Don't waste the season you're currently in. Now, this is there's a lot of different age groups represented here. Some of you are young families. Some of you are college students, young adults in your 20s. Some of you have homework. Some of you don't. Some of you are working on ancestry stuff. Some of you are in your older stage of life. You're at the later stages of life. You've had a lot of experience under your belt. Some of you are dealing with all different kinds of things, grandkids and whatever else is on your plate. Apparently, y'all got a lot going on. We've all got a lot going on. But we're all in a different season of life. So whatever season of life you're currently in, my encouragement to you is don't waste it. Don't waste it. Even if it's painful, uncomfortable, maybe it's really, really good. But enjoy it. Make the most of it. I can't help but think of Joseph from the book of Genesis. Now you remember, Joseph was sold into Egyptian slavery. He went through a lot of different seasons really quickly. He was sold into Egyptian slavery, and he ends up in Potiphar's palace or place or whatever. Potiphar's place, let's call it that. And he ends up over there. Well, Potiphar's wife starts hitting on him. Hey, come to bed with me. Hey, come to bed with me, all that kind of stuff. Well, Joseph resists and everything, but finally she snatches his robe and he runs off and does the right thing, but he gets accused of having an affair with her. And so now all of a sudden he gets thrown in the prison. He's accused, but he's serving time in prison for something that he did not do. You know how old Joseph was when he entered the prison? Anybody know? 17 years old. You know when he gets out? 30. For 13 years, Joseph just sat in the prison for something that he did not do. Talk about a season. 13 years looking at the same walls and the same people. I'm sure some people died and some people came back in and replaced them. But that was a long season. And yet we see the scarlet red thread of the book of Genesis, and yet the Lord was with Joseph, and yet the Lord was with Joseph. He became kind of ranking over the prisoners and all that, and he was the prisoner in command kind of, and the Lord was with Joseph, and the Lord was with Joseph. And then he rises at some point to second in command over all of Egypt by God's providence. And then, y'all know the story about how his brothers come in, and then there's a famine in the land and all that kind of stuff, and they reunite, and Joseph stands before his brothers, and now they're like, oh no, Joseph's in power. He's going to get us. And Joseph looks them in the eye and says this, Genesis 50, everything you meant for me was evil, but God meant it for good. Everything you meant for me was evil, but God meant it for good. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. Don't waste this season. I don't know exactly what Joseph did in that season of 13 years between 17 and 30, but man, it wasn't wasted. And the beautiful thing about this is there's a time and place for everything to happen. Not everything happens in time because it is God's will. I don't know that it was God's will that Joseph spent all that time in the prison, but the Lord was still with Joseph. The seasons of life that you and I are in are not wasted with our God. Time is a reality, and sometimes it's a mystery, yet God is sovereign over it all. And when you surrender to the King of Kings, He can and He will work redemptively in your situation, in your season of life. So don't waste it while you're in it. Don't view it as a waste. Oh, I'm just killing time. I'm just killing time, waiting on the next thing to happen. And you might be waiting, sure, but don't view it as a waste. Don't view it as something just to get through to the next thing, so you can get to the next season or whatever. Take it for what it is. Learn everything you can. Let God work redemptively in your season of life right here, right now. Good, bad, ugly, blessing. Use it all. Let Him use it all. But you've got to bow your knee to the King of Kings, and you've got to turn yourself over to Him and surrender to Him and give Him time, ironically, to work all things together. He can work all things together for your blessing and His glory. Do you believe it? Do you believe it? Don't waste the season you're currently in. He's sovereign. He exists over time, and He can work redemptively in real time. All right. This has been Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8. Let's close with a word of prayer. We'll be dismissed. Father God, we are so humbled that within real time you hear us, you listen to us, and yet, Father, you are outside of time. You are not dependent upon time. And yet there is coming a day when we will all bow before you. We will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to your glory, and we will go one way or another. And Father, we are humbled at that. We are thankful for your salvation, for your glory. We praise you, we thank you, we love you, and God, we just ask and pray that you would open our hearts and our minds to the season that we're in. Help us look around and see how we can make the most of this time. Lead us and guide us, continue to be with us in this study of Ecclesiastes, and help us trust your sovereignty, help us trust your goodness, help us trust your will and to seek your will in everything that we do, because you are the name that is above every name. Help us bow our knees before you and love you and cherish you as you have so loved us. It's in your holy and precious name that we pray. Amen.